On today's episode, we're going to do a review of the Taurus TX22. Now the TX22 is a 22 long rifle, semi-automatic striker-fired pistol. Being a striker-fired pistol in a 22 rimfire configuration makes it very unique to the market. Now whether you're an experienced shooter or new to shooting sports, you probably heard something about Taurus. Whether it's good or whether it's bad, we're going to take that out of the mix and just judge the TX22 upon its own merits. So why the TX22? Well, first, it's very similar to a centerfire pistol. The way the controls are, the way the slide operation is, even the way you field strip the firearm is very similar to a centerfire pistol. You'll note that the controls are easily reached and in the same configuration as a centerfire pistol. Why is this important? Well, during competition or during training or practice, building that muscle memory that transfers over well to a centerfire pistol is very important. If you have any malfunctions, you're not fumbling around with controls that are in a different configuration from your regular firearm. Another thing that attracted me to the TX22 was the price. An MSRP of $349, you could find a TX22 at your dealer for well under $300. When I purchased mine, Taurus offered a $50 rebate, so it made perfect sense to pick up an economical pistol for recreational shooting or competition. Speaking of competition, when I was at one Steel Challenge match, I noticed a shooter using a TX22. I asked him about it, and he said it is very reliable and dependable. I noticed that he had no malfunctions throughout the match, and that his scores were pretty good. Now, a few other things that really sold me on the TX22 was the amount of features and options that Taurus put into this platform, especially at the price point, really makes it an exceptional value. Another thing is the trigger pull. It's not that the trigger pull is very light, it measures in at just over 5 pounds. However, the trigger pull is exceptionally smooth and offers great feel. The trigger reset is really short and really aids in slow fire or rapid fire shooting. Well, without any further ado, let's get to the tabletop review of the TX22. The Taurus TX22 comes in a cardboard box. What I found in mine was an advertising brochure for another firearm that Taurus produces. I also found the owner's manual. Whether you're a beginner or an experienced shooter, it's always important to read the owner's manual from front to back and understand all the information that's contained within it. Now, just because this is a brand new pistol, we shouldn't assume that it's unloaded. Following safe firearm handling procedures, grip the firearm firmly to maintain control, keeping that muzzle pointed in a safe direction and your finger out of the trigger guard. Remove the plastic. You'll note that the TX22 comes packaged with one 16-round magazine already inserted into the magazine well. To remove the magazine, depress the magazine release, which frees up the magazine. Remove the magazine and check for ammunition. Maintaining good muzzle discipline, keeping that muzzle pointed in a safe direction and the finger out of the trigger guard. Pull back the slide to visually check the chamber to ensure that there is no ammunition present. Work the slide back several times to make sure that the firearm is clear. Place the pistol in a slide lock position. The TX22 comes with an additional 16-round magazine. To help aid in reloading of those magazines, Taurus includes a magazine reloader. And because the TX22 comes with a threaded barrel for suppressor or compensator use, Taurus actually includes a barrel adapter for that general purpose. Also included is a safety lock and a note to remind you to register your firearm through the Taurus Limited Lifetime Warranty Program right on taurususa.com. It only takes a few minutes. Regardless of the manufacturer, it's always important to do as soon as possible your registration for a warranty program. So in case you have any issues, it's taken care of promptly. Field stripping or disassembly of the TX22 couldn't be any easier. There are no special tools required. Locate the takedown lever. It's located within the polymer frame, sitting flush right above the trigger. Since we already have the firearm in the slide lock position and the magazine removed, we're going to follow Taurus's recommendations found in the owner's manual on how to disassemble. You press down the slide lock lever to allow the slide to go forward. Depress the trigger. At this point, to relieve the tension on the takedown lever, move the slide back slightly. Pull down on the takedown lever, and the slide comes off rather easily. Taurus has done a really good job with this 22 pistol to make it a lot like a centerfire pistol. For further disassembly, push forward slightly on the recoil spring, allowing the barrel to drop freely and be removed. The recoil spring is captured and also has a polymer style guide rod. The barrel is designed a lot like its centerfire counterpart. Right down to the locking lugs and feed ramp, it's very similar to a Smith & Wesson M&P or a Glock. The threaded muzzle protector is easily removed with a 3/8 inch wrench. Engage the flat spots of the muzzle protector with the 3/8 inch wrench. Turn counterclockwise to remove the thread protector. Reinstall into the slide and tighten the adapter from the outside of the slide. Attach your compensator or suppressor. You'll notice that the TX22 has a deep recessed crown on it. This is an accuracy feature found mostly on target pistols. The feed ramp on the barrel of the TX22 isn't polished and could probably benefit from some polishing. Now there has been several reports on earlier TX22s that the rifling has not been cut concentric or centered, shall we say, within the barrel. Mine doesn't look that bad at all. So when you're at your dealer and you're interested in a TX22, make sure to take apart the firearm and look down the barrel, especially where the rifling meets the chamber. What you'll notice is some very severely high spots and severely low spots. This will give an indication that you have a barrel from an earlier run of pistols. Another issue reported with the TX22 is chattering marks within the rifling. As you can see here, especially in the grooves, not so much in the lands. There are scratch marks, basically machine marks. Now, out of all these reports of bad barrels with the chattering marks in the rifling, or the rifling being off-center from the barrel axis itself, the reports come back that Taurus customer service had taken care of these people by replacing the barrels with a new run of barrels that are not having those issues. Now, it's not a safety concern as much as it is a lead accumulation in the barrel, which could affect accuracy. Now, one thing reported by many shooters that have a high round count through the TX22 is that the finish starts getting marked up, especially to the top and rear of the ejection port from the ejecting shells. It appears to be just a cosmetic issue, and no further problems were reported with that. While we have the slide off the firearm, let's take a better look at it. You'll note to the front and to the back. There are very deep, aggressive cocking serrations. The front sight is removable / replaceable by removing this screw with the appropriate sized Allen hex wrench. There are very deep grooves along the slide that interact with the steel inserts, the slide rails more or less, embedded within the polymer frame. Being a striker-fired pistol, you notice many similarities between the TX22 and its centerfire cousins. You'll notice on the top of the slide, there is no top ejection port. All casings are ejected through the right side of the slide. The letters TX is laser engraved into the aluminum slide. Note again the very deep and aggressive cocking serrations. And also as a styling cue, there's a scallop running the length of the slide. The sights on the TX22 are made of polymer construction. They are dovetailed into the aluminum slide and also are adjustable for elevation and windage. The front sight again is removable with access from the bottom of the slide. The sights on my pistol were adjusted all the way to the left. The sights are of a 3-dot white configuration and are very low profile. On the back of the slide, there is a cover that is removable in order to gain access to the striker firing mechanism. If needing to access the firing mechanism for any reason, for servicing, cleaning, or to replace any parts, press down inside the hole on the back cover plate. Now, a word of caution, the thing that you're pressing down on is under spring tension. It's actually part of the plunger for the firing mechanism. Carefully slide the cover down while retaining that springed button inside. Remove the plunger and the spring. Now right here, this is your firing pin actually. It slides right here in a little channel. So just begin to pull that to the back of the slide. You'll notice that the whole body will start coming out. There is another part here that contains a spring, so be very careful not to lose the spring. The part of the two-piece firing mechanism is on the right hand of the slide. If you were to take the now open slide and point it away from you, it'll be the half of the firing mechanism that is on the right hand side of the slide. Now what that spring actually does, it's part of the firing mechanism that creates a safety and blocks the firing pin from going any further. If you see me actuating here, you can see that little tab. That'll actually prevent the firing pin in a striker firing mechanism from hitting the cartridge until fully engaged with the trigger. The left side half of the firing mechanism has the firing pin in it. Also, you can see here there's a groove where the spring and the plunger rides. There are no other small parts on this part of the firing mechanism to get lost. One thing to be aware of to make sure you don't lose is the extractor spring here that fits into this body that fits inside the slide. Now this body doesn't necessarily have to be removed. It's actually pinned in place with some roll pins. Unless you have experience removing and replacing roll pins correctly, you could probably just leave this whole body in here. There's really not any other moving parts except for the spring and for the extractor. And here is a view of the firing mechanism taken apart. For reassembly, you'll see a small part in this little horseshoe on the right-hand side of the firing mechanism body for where the spring resides. There is also a place on the right-hand side of the firing mechanism body of where the spring will reside. Set the spring inside the horseshoe part, inside the little prong. Take your right half of the body of the firing mechanism. Seat in the spring into the two spots. Making sure that the tab that's engaged on the back side of that horseshoe goes inside the slot. Make sure that it freely maneuvers. Place the firing pin on the face of the left-hand side of the firing mechanism body. Then put together the left and the right-hand side of the firing mechanism, making sure that everything lines up well. And that the firing pin moves back freely. Slide the now together firing mechanism body into the slide, making sure still that the firing pin moves freely. Place the plunger into the spring. At this point, take your slide cover plate, feed it into the slide. There's 2 grooves to either side of which it fits. Push down a little bit on the firing mechanism body, leaving just enough room to return the spring and the plunger. Push down on the spring and the plunger, and then feed in, being careful not to release your plunger. Slide up your slide cover. Make sure it snaps into place. With everything reassembled, check that your firing pin travels back to the back of the slide. You should experience some pretty good resistance here. At this point, our next function test will be making sure that the firing pin does not move forward until, of course, that horseshoe part that we talked about, the spring, which acts as a safety, is depressed. And now the firing pin can move forward. Reinstall the slide onto the firearm and check for function. The polymer frame is full size and is very familiar to anyone who's ever had a full size polymer frame striker fired pistol. Taking a look from the top at the TX22's polymer frame with the slide removed reveals many similarities between the TX22 and many centerfire striker fired pistols. The polymer frame of the TX22 has several innovative features incorporated into it, which increases the shootability and the ergonomics of the firearm. The front of the frame is railed and has 2 accessory slots for mounting lights or lasers. To either side of the frame, there's a scalloped indentation in order to index either your support or strong side finger when on or off target. For those that prefer to use the trigger guard for added support, the trigger guard is squared off and flat. Note the little protrusion that gives you a little bit more traction if you prefer to use the trigger guard for added support. There are other features incorporated into the frame that increases the shootability and feel and comfort of this firearm, even for people such as me with small hands. The trigger guard area offers a lot of room for shooting with gloves on. The magazine release, which is reversible, is located in an ergonomic area, very reminiscent of a Smith & Wesson M&P or even a Glock. The trigger guard is undercut. This aids the shooter in many ways. One is the general grip of the firearm. It also lowers the firearm into the hand a little bit deeper and allows for quicker target acquisition. It helps with recoil management. And again, for people such as myself with small hands, this is a blessing. There's also a small finger groove here. It's the only finger groove on the grip. Speaking of the grip, the textures that are on the grip runs on the back strap and on the front strap and on either side. It's not overly aggressive. It gives you very good traction without being too irritating. The addition of these triangular indentations at the bottom of the handle is a great feature. You can practice malfunction drills and get a good grip on the bottom of the magazine plate. The magazine well is flared at the front of the well, which allows speed reloading to be very smooth and natural. The magazine just finds its way right into the well. I really wish that they incorporated that to either side of the magazine well. The bottom of the grip protrudes slightly and starts to form a very comfortable pinky extension, more or less, which actually enhances the grip. Once the magazine is inserted, this extension continues onward. Reversing the magazine latch on the TX22 is super easy. Make sure that there is no magazine in the well and that the slide is removed. Now looking down into the magazine well from the top of the slide, you can see a tiny little silver bar in there. That is to put tension and to act as a spring on the magazine latch, and also works to retain the magazine latch in the frame. Support the magazine latch on the non-texture side with a finger, get a flathead screwdriver, get in there, and move that silver bar all the way over. You'll see here that it'll pop out. Now I found it much easier to simply get in there with a set of needle nose pliers and just remove the bar from the frame. Without the retaining bar spring in the frame, you'll see that the magazine latch is basically free floating in there. There's nothing to retain it or put tension on it. You will now be able to remove the magazine latch. The magazine release latch is made of metal. Has very good texturing, very good traction on the one side, and the other side is smooth. Here are the J channels of which the rod fits into and over. Simply take your magazine latch, flip it over, and insert back into the frame. The TX22 is as easy to assemble as it was to disassemble and requires no special tools. Much like a centerfire semi-auto pistol, drop in the barrel, let gravity push it towards the breech. Pick up the recoil spring, set it in the hole, make sure it's seated in there good. Push forward slightly until it latches on the barrel lug. Now before you put your slide onto your frame, you want to make sure that you line up this lug right into here. There's a little cut that it sits in. So instead of like a full-size, full-frame centerfire pistol where you have to start back here, you're actually attaching it back there. Make sure it's on the frame rails, rack the slide back, and you're fully functioning. The TX22 slide also locks back after the last round is fired. The included barrel adapter is 1/2 inch by 28 tread. There are 2 flat spots on the adapter to ease with installation, and a 9/16 or an adaptable wrench fits it well. The TX22's magazine is made of polymer and comes in either 16 or 10 rounds. The top of the magazine is beveled for easy reloads and feeding of ammunition. There are buttons to either side of the magazine, which when pulled down retracts the follower for easy ammunition loading. Simply pull down on the tabs and feed your ammunition on top of the follower. or use the supplied magazine loading tool. You will note how the ammunition is staggered inside the magazine. When fully loaded, the reloading button only goes this far. When unloaded and disassembling the magazine for servicing, this button will fall down into this open area, allowing for the button to be released and allow the follower to be removed. The notches on either side of the magazine allow for ambidextrous or reversing of the magazine release for either left or right-handed shooting. The size and shape of the TX22's magazine is very similar to those found on full-size semi-auto pistols. For comparison, the TX22 is next to a Glock full-size 15-round magazine. You could also note that the base plates are very similar. The width and the depth of the TX22's magazines is exactly that of an M&P Shield, a 1911, and most single-stack pistol magazines. So the size and feel of the TX22's magazines should be very familiar to anyone who uses a centerfire semi-auto pistol. It also allows you to use magazine holders and magazine holsters for single-stack magazines. The angle of the magazine follower allows the ammunition to align perfectly with the chamber. It also allows ample room on the feed ramp for any ammunition that have nosedived within the magazine. It was once said about the Winchester lever rifle that it's the gun that you load on Sunday and shoot all week. The TX22's 16-round magazine plus one in the chamber has sort of the same sentiment. The disassembly of the TX22's magazine is rather simple. Press down, move the base plate forward. Now before you go any further, I want to make sure to warn you that there's a small retaining clip in here that runs on a track with the spring underneath it. So you want to make sure that you keep your finger in place to hold that back from shooting out of the magazine and most probably getting lost. Now slowly cup the top of the magazine to make sure that these little pieces don't go flying everywhere. Further disassembly is to push out the button, bring it all the way to the bottom of the magazine, take out your button, and then the follower will come out. Reassembly of the TX22's magazine is rather simple. Looking from the bottom of the magazine, you'll see there's two chambers, one for where the ammunition rides and one for where the spring goes. Take your follower, place it in the magazine with the hole lining up at the bottom of the magazine. At this point, put in your retaining pin, which aids in reloading, and move it to the top of the magazine. Put in your spring, retain it with your finger. You notice that this piece is somewhat triangular and there's two sides to it, one that fits inside the spring and one that engages the base plate of the magazine. Obviously put the larger circle fitted within the spring and make sure to capture that with your finger. Now slide on the base plate and then make sure you hear the click and see it engage. Now because of the size and the shape of the TX22's magazines, it makes the platform a lot more likable as a training firearm to use economically versus a centerfire firearm, and to practice low speed reloads. If used in timed competitions such as Steel Challenge, the weight of the pistol makes a great difference, not only transitioning from target to target, but also in muzzle flip. So when this slide goes back, the muzzle is going to flip up. How you control that pistol and a heavier pistol will get you back on target quicker. A heavier, all-steel construction pistol such as this Ruger Mark II competition model definitely keeps you on target a lot better during rapid fire just because of the weight of the firearm. However, it does lack the ergonomics of the TX22 as far as being compared to a centerfire pistol. So the TX22, as far as being a trainer, definitely is more valuable when it comes to speed shooting than the Ruger. This graphic shows how the TX22 compares dimensionally to other popular 22 semi-auto pistols and is currently the least expensive of the group of pistols listed. I couldn't confirm the trigger poundages or resets on the group of pistols listed for a more detailed comparison. However, having shot all of the pistols listed, I'd have to best match the TX22 to the Walther PPQ-22 in regards to weight, trigger control, grip, and features. Now, some of the advantages of the TX22 being so lightweight is that muzzle flip. In other words, if you're using the TX22 as a training platform, an economical way of training rather than using your centerfire pistol, you're going to have a little bit more muzzle flip. You're going to have to control that recoil a little bit more. So it transfers well over to the centerfire pistol. Also, the lightweightness of the TX22 makes it a great trail gun. You can take it on a hike without having to worry about it weighting you down. Let's talk a little bit about the TX22's trigger pull. The TX22 has a wonderful trigger in it, not only just for a 22, but for as a full-size polymer pistol being striker fired. It's just a fabulous trigger. One of the wonderful features about the TX22 is the trigger pull. Now, the firearm has been cleared of all ammunition and made safe. It has been cocked. Using a trigger pull gauge, we're going to measure the trigger as it comes new out of the box. The trigger breaks at around 5¼ pounds. Now, the one thing about the TX22's trigger that has been bragged about not only by Taurus, but by everyone who shot it, is the short trigger reset. This firearm has been cleared and made safe. There's no ammunition or magazine in it. We pull the trigger back, now making sure not to move the trigger at all. We mark that spot. Bring back the slide again to recock the firearm. We bring our trigger forward, just slightly, ease it forward till we hear the click of the reset. We're going to mark that position. Just want to make sure that we marked it properly, and we're going to get a measurement. So the amount of travel to let up on the trigger in order for the trigger to reset is 0.120 inches. This graphic shows how the TX22 compares dimensionally to a pair of popular centerfire pistols. As I spoke of how similar the TX22 is to centerfire pistols and a great platform to use as a trainer for practice, these measurements reflect that the muscle memory developed with the TX22 transfers well over to centerfire pistols. So where does the TX22 fit in when compared to other popular models of firearms? Well, right in the middle. The TX22 has very similar aspects to it as far as a full-size Glock goes, as far as length, height, and width. The trigger guard is very similar to a full-size Glock. Now, the trigger pull is very similar to an M&P Shield Performance Center model. Also, the contours on the TX22 better reflect those that are found on an M&P Shield. When it comes to the location of the controls on the TX22, it isn't so foreign as to the M&P Shield or to a full-size Glock, which really makes the TX22 a very affordable training pistol. As far as gripping the firearm goes, and especially if you have small hands like me, I liken the TX22 more towards the M&P Shield. When it comes to the general overall size, I liken the TX22 more towards a full-size Glock. The full-size frame of the TX22 allows it to be easily carried in a universal style holster, whether at the range or on the trail. As the size and the shape of the TX22 and its magazines can be well adapted to gear you probably already have, it makes it that much more valuable as a training practice platform. Now I know it's very difficult to describe the feel and the contours of a firearm, especially on video. But on either side of the frame, you know there's a contour that feeds your finger right to the trigger when going on target. I would have to best compare the TX22 grip and feel to those of the Walther 22s. As mentioned before, the contours of the TX22, along with the location of controls, makes it very ergonomic and easy to operate. Magazine release, slide lock, manual safety. To elaborate a little bit more on the manual safety model of the TX22, let's make sure that the firearm is clear. There's no magazine in the well. There is no ammunition in the chamber. You rack the slide a few times. The firearm is now cocked and is free of ammunition. Engage the manual safety. You'll note that the trigger is a dead trigger. It doesn't fire. The safety actually disengages the trigger from the firing mechanism. Take the safety off, the firearm fires. You'll also note that there is no magazine in the magazine well, and the firearm was able to fire. There is no magazine disconnect on the TX22. So let's talk a little bit more about the TX22 safety features. We've discussed the model with the manual safety. Also, the way a striker-fired pistol works is that it's partially cocked until the trigger itself is pulled to a certain point, which then fully cocks back the striker and therefore being released by further pressing the trigger back. Now, when it comes to the safety features on a trigger, much like a Glock or a Smith & Wesson M&P or several other centerfire pistols, the trigger itself is a two-piece design with a trigger disconnect. Taurus has put, for comfort and feel, a trigger shoe over that mechanism. So when looking at the firearm overall, I believe that Taurus really did their homework and took some of the best features from other 22 pistols and some centerfire pistols alike and put them all into one platform that's affordable and easy to shoot. I tell you folks, this pistol is a welcome addition to my gun safe. Now the TX22, especially at this price point, really is loaded full of features and it's hard to find a gripe about it. However, there's a few things that I really think Taurus could have done a little bit better and is really just nitpicking. One is the construction of the sights. Rather than polymer, I definitely would rather see an aluminum or steel sight setup. Another thing I noticed is that the front dot is the same size as the dots in the back. Now when you put this on target, you'll notice that the front dot seems to be a lot smaller. It's a perspective thing. I would actually prefer the dots to be the same size or larger in the front sight than on the rear sights. Another nitpicking thing of mine is that although a nice feature, the front of the magazine well has a bevel to it or is flared out a little bit. I would really like to see Taurus continue that on either side of the magazine well, which would make magazine changes a lot easier. One more thing that I can nitpick about, and believe me, I'm truly nitpicking here, is that Taurus went ahead and went through the trouble of putting these flat spots on the threaded muzzle protector. Now, it would have been nice to see him put something, even a cheesy little flat tool in the box to help with removal and installation of the threaded muzzle protector, and also of the installation of the 1/2 by 28 suppressor adapter. One thing I'd like to point out, and at this point is truly nitpicking, is how the barrel mates up at the front of the slide. Now, most semi-automatic pistol barrels will need to ride somewhere on the slide, usually here at the 6 o'clock position for better barrel alignment and lockup. As I pull back the slide a little bit, you'll see where the flat spot of the muzzle protector is. This is a little bit off center, basically causing the more rounded part of the muzzle to ride to the side of the slide rather than down here in the 6 o'clock position. I believe that probably a quarter turn less of threading on the barrel could have solved this issue and provided better barrel alignment. But at an MSRP of $349 and probably being able to be found at your dealer for under $300, the Taurus TX22 has several features that is very desirable, and I could overlook some of those nitpicking. So we've covered in detail the many features of the TX22 and compared it to many other pistols on the market in our tabletop review. We've also looked at the TX22 as it serves as a great training platform for centerfire pistols and of the good value that the TX22 provides in that capacity. Now, although part one of our overall review of the TX22 was a tabletop, first impression, straight out of the box type of thing, we did note a few things that may or may not have been better done on the TX22. Now, in part two, we're going to take the TX22 out to the range and put several rounds down range. We'll find out then if those things pointed out do become an issue or not, or if we have anything else that develops along the way. Now, don't forget to check out part two of our TX22 review, where we take the pistol out to the range and shoot over 1,300 rounds without cleaning it to check for reliability. We're going to do some slow firing, we're going to do some rapid firing from different distances throughout the range. We're going to shoot off the bench and freehand. This is something you're not going to want to miss.